The soft chime of the boarding door echoed through the cabin as Maye Musk stepped into the first-class section of Sky Frontier Flight 208, traveling from Los Angeles to New York. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large oval windows, casting golden patterns on the polished surfaces of crystal glasses and brushed aluminum seat frames. The air was filled with a low hum of quiet conversations, a polished orchestra of business murmurs, stock updates, and polite laughter. Maye moved with quiet grace, her step steady, her posture relaxed, as though the narrow aisle was simply another familiar hallway she had crossed many times before. She wore a simple grey turtleneck, soft but fitted, paired with classic dark jeans and beige flats. Her silver-white hair was swept back into a smooth, elegant bun, revealing sharp cheekbones and gentle eyes that held years of experience and calm. There was no extravagant jewelry, no designer logos stitched onto her clothing. She carried only a small black leather handbag that rested easily on her arm. Every part of her appearance whispered a confidence that required no validation. As she reached her assigned seat, 2A, several heads subtly turned, taking her in with fleeting glances that carried unspoken judgments. A man in a navy suit leaned slightly toward his seatmate, speaking just low enough to avoid being obvious. Frequent flyer upgrade, I'd bet. Probably used her son's points. His companion smirked in agreement, eyes flickering toward Maye. Or maybe she won some promo lottery. First class has become so accessible these days, it's lost all exclusivity. The corner of Maye's mouth lifted, barely perceptible, as she caught the words. She had heard worse many times before. She lowered her handbag onto the carpeted floor and settled into the wide burgundy leather seat. The headrest adjusted with a soft click as she eased back, folding her hands gently in her lap for a moment before reaching into her tote bag. From it, she pulled a hardcover book, its edges worn from years of use. The Science of Nutrition. She ran her fingers briefly over the familiar title before opening to the bookmarked page. The familiar scent of paper and ink offered a quiet comfort as she immersed herself in its content, her breathing slow and steady. The cabin filled gradually as other first-class passengers boarded. There were hedge fund managers juggling last-minute phone calls, legal consultants reviewing contracts, and young tech entrepreneurs scrolling through pitch decks on tablets. The air was heavy with polished arrogance, each occupant wearing their wealth-like armor, flashing watches, silk ties, and designer handbags like subtle weapons in an unspoken contest of status. As Maye read, she could feel the weight of their eyes. They glanced at her turtleneck, her modest handbag, the absence of any recognizable luxury brand. In their minds, she was an anomaly, an outsider who had somehow slipped into a world carefully curated for the elite. But Maye paid them no mind. She had long since stopped measuring her worth by the standards of people like this. A gentle movement caught her eye as Melissa, the lead flight attendant, approached with practiced ease, her uniform crisp, her expression perfectly neutral yet warm. She bent slightly, speaking in a voice low enough for only Maye to hear. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Musk." "Thank you, Melissa." Their eyes met briefly, exchanging a shared understanding that required no words. Melissa had served Maye many times before on Sky Frontier flights, always maintaining the discretion that both respected and protected Maye's privacy. In this cabin, no one else needed to know who she was. Behind her, another man settled into seat 2B. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his tailored suit pressed to precision. He adjusted the cuff of his French shirt, revealing a gleaming Patek Philippe watch as he stole a glance at Maye, allowing the faintest smirk to pull at the corner of his mouth. Maye returned to her book, turning the page with steady fingers, her eyes calm, unaffected. The whispers continued around her, quiet but sharp, like the rustle of leaves in a steady breeze. But they were nothing more than passing winds to her, unable to disturb the deep roots of a woman who had already weathered far greater storms. Outside the plane, the last rays of daylight stretched across the tarmac, bathing the jet in a soft golden glow as the final preparations for departure continued. Inside, conversations swirled like gentle eddies in the spacious cabin, filled with assumptions, speculation, and quiet competitions of power. Maye closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking in a slow breath. Another flight. Another journey. And perhaps, she thought, another lesson quietly waiting to unfold. The plane had reached its cruising altitude, and the gentle hum of the engines filled the cabin with a low, steady rhythm. The initial bustle of boarding had faded, replaced by the soft murmur of conversations, the occasional clink of ice in crystal glasses, and the rustle of newspapers being unfolded by polished hands. Outside the windows, streaks of orange and gold painted the endless canvas of sky, while inside, the air carried a quiet tension that hung between the rows of first-class passengers. Maye Musk sat quietly in her seat, eyes scanning the familiar lines of her book, though she no longer truly read. The steady pulse of words floated past her consciousness as the atmosphere around her shifted. She could feel it building before she heard it, like distant thunder approaching. Across the aisle, Walter Kingsley leaned toward his two companions, both sharply dressed men who seemed eager to match his energy. Walter's voice carried just enough volume to ensure those nearby could hear, though he maintained the polished tone of someone who had mastered the art of veiled insults. "You know, it is amazing who ends up in first class these days," Walter said with a smirk. "Back in the day, you had to actually earn your way up here. Now, a few loyalty points, maybe a well-connected son or daughter, and suddenly you are sipping champagne at 35,000 feet. His friend chuckled, glancing briefly toward Maye. "Happens all the time," he said. "You see these older women, clearly not the regular business type, sitting here like they belong. I suppose their children buy them the ticket as a nice little gift." Walter nodded, his eyes sliding once again toward Maye, lingering on her simple turtleneck and worn book. "Nothing wrong with a little charity for family, I suppose," Walter continued. "It must be nice to ride along on someone else's success. Not everyone needs to build something themselves when they have offspring who do." Maye turned another page, her face calm, betraying none of the flickers that stirred beneath the surface. She had been here before. Not on this plane, not with these men, but in countless rooms where assumptions like these hovered around her like gnats. She had learned long ago that silence, when delivered with grace, often echoed louder than words. Walter shifted in his seat, clearly emboldened by the lack of response. He decided to press a little further, adopting a tone of polite curiosity. "Pardon me, he said, leaning slightly toward her. Maye looked up, meeting his gaze with a polite smile. "Yes? First time flying Sky Frontier first class?" he asked, his voice laced with mock warmth. "It is quite an experience, isn't it?" "No, not my first time," Maye replied evenly, her tone gentle but firm. "Ah, well then you must enjoy it often." He glanced around theatrically before adding, "It is certainly a luxury not everyone can afford regularly. You must have some very generous children." Maye allowed herself a small smile, her eyes never leaving his. "I am very fortunate, yes," she said simply, then returned to her book without offering more. Walter sat back, the corners of his mouth twitching into a self-satisfied grin, as if he had scored some invisible point. His companions chuckled softly, and one of them whispered just loud enough for Maye to hear. Probably one of those mothers who raised some tech billionaire. You know the type. Now they live off the perks while their kids run the companies. The group laughed again, low and conspiratorial. The sound crawled beneath the polite hum of the cabin like an unwelcome draft. Maye inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady her. She knew these conversations, these sideways glances, the casual dismissals wrapped in civility. They always assumed. They always measured value by proximity to wealth, never by character. Outside, the clouds drifted silently past, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding inside the aircraft. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants prepared for the meal service, their movements smooth and rehearsed. Melissa passed by, her eyes briefly meeting Maye's with a flicker of silent understanding. The flight attendant had witnessed these dynamics before, and her brief pause near Maye's seat was deliberate. "Everything all right, Mrs. Musk?" she whispered softly. Maye looked up, offering another gentle smile. "All good, Melissa. Thank you." Melissa nodded, her face professional but her eyes warm, then moved along the aisle as if nothing had passed between them. But Diana Winters, seated a few rows back, noticed. She had been watching the exchange, her sharp eyes taking in not only the words but the unsaid undercurrents filling the cabin. She returned her gaze to the tablet on her lap, but her attention remained fixed on the unfolding scene, quietly noting the subtle pieces aligning around her. Walter and his friends continued their light conversation, oblivious to the silent observers around them, their laughter now floating carelessly into the quiet, unaware that they were standing on the edge of a lesson they would not soon forget. The plane had settled into its smooth cruise, the initial climb replaced by a gentle hum that filled the spacious first-class cabin like a soft blanket. Outside, a blanket of clouds stretched endlessly, reflecting the fading sunlight in shades of gold and ivory. Inside, the mood shifted as the passengers relaxed into their conversations, drinks clinking lightly against polished glass, laughter floating between seats like whispers of privilege. May remained in her seat, eyes calmly following the words on her book, her breathing steady, though she could feel the subtle shift in energy around her. Walter Kingsley's voice broke through the quiet rhythm, rising just above the polite murmur of his companions. His tone carried that practiced confidence found in men who rarely feared being challenged. He leaned slightly toward the group, glancing once more at May before speaking. You know, I have to admit, Elon Musk is something else. A brilliant strategist, no doubt. Took that floundering airline and made Skyfrontier the gold standard for luxury air travel. The others nodded, eager to agree. Visionary, one of them chimed. Right place, right time, but still, it takes guts. Walter smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass before continuing. Of course, even geniuses have their blind spots. You see these billionaire types all the time. Hardworking, driven, sure. But then there's always the entourage of family leeches orbiting them. Wives, ex-wives, sisters, and mothers living off their coattails. Sitting pretty while the real work gets done elsewhere. A quiet chuckle rippled through the small group. May's page paused mid-turn, though her hand remained steady, her eyes fixed calmly on the paragraph before her. She had heard versions of this before. The scenery changed, but the melody was always familiar. Walter's voice dropped just slightly, as if sharing a private joke with his audience. I mean, how many times do we see it? Some aging mother paraded out for charity galas, sitting front row at press events, being called an inspiration. All while their billionaire sons foot the bill for their luxurious lifestyles. Another round of quiet laughter. The words slid like sharp little daggers, dressed in civility but laced with disdain. May took a slow breath, the familiar sensation of being underestimated wrapping around her like a draft of cold air. But she let it pass, her focus returning to the words on the page, though the letters blurred slightly. A woman seated several rows behind shifted in her seat. Diana Winters. Her tailored blazer was crisp, her pearl earrings catching the cabin lights as she glanced up from her tablet. She had been half listening for the past several minutes, her eyes occasionally drifting toward May, studying not just the scene, but the tension beneath it. There was a sharpness in her gaze, the kind born from years of boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations. She recognized the dynamic unfolding with painful clarity. The conversation continued, undeterred. I saw an interview with one of them, Walter said, shaking his head. Preaching about hard work and independence, while wearing jewelry their sons probably bought for them. Talking about self-made success while flying private jets paid for by their children's fortunes. He gestured vaguely in May's direction, though never directly enough to break decorum. The others followed his glance, their expressions hovering between amusement and superiority. The irony is, they like to play humble. Dressing casually, like it proves something. As if wearing jeans and a simple sweater makes them relatable. It is almost charming, really. May's fingers tightened just slightly around her book's edge. She had chosen comfort over appearance deliberately, always had. But here, in this floating showroom of tailored suits and designer watches, her choice became an invitation for judgment. Melissa approached quietly from the galley, her steps light as always, her timing impeccable. She stopped briefly by May's seat, her voice dropping to a whisper meant for her alone. Everything all right, Mrs. Musk. May looked up, offering a gentle smile that carried both gratitude and reassurance. Perfectly fine. Thank you, Melissa. Their brief exchange was unnoticed by the others, but Diana observed it with subtle curiosity, her interest sharpening as the pieces began to arrange themselves. Walter, oblivious, carried on, leaning back with the casual arrogance of a man who believed himself the cleverest voice in the room. At the end of the day, it is not jealousy, of course, he continued smoothly. I admire success. But let's not pretend everyone riding first class earned their way here. Some simply got lucky in their offspring. The laughter returned, a little louder this time, emboldened by drinks and unchallenged egos. Maye remained still, letting the words roll over her like distant thunder. She had heard them before, in different forms, from different faces. Always the same undercurrent of small men grasping at status, needing to measure worth by proximity to wealth rather than their own character. Diana's gaze lingered on Maye for a moment longer, her expression unreadable but focused. She glanced briefly at Walter, then returned to her tablet, her mind filing the moment carefully, as if knowing the story was far from finished. Outside the cabin, the fading sunlight dipped lower, casting a soft amber glow across the plane's wings. Inside, the storm of assumptions swirled on, unchecked and self-congratulatory, completely unaware of how close they stood to a revelation none of them were prepared to face. The cabin settled into a strange quiet, though the low hum of the engines and the occasional clinking of glasses filled the silence left behind by Walter's most recent remark. The laughter from his group had faded, but its echo still hung in the air like an invisible fog. Maye turned another page of her book, her expression composed, her breathing steady. Outwardly, she remained untouched, yet beneath the calm surface was a steady current of restraint. She had faced worse, but that never made such moments pleasant. Walter sat back, sipping his drink with the smug air of a man who believed he had said something clever. His companions chuckled softly again, though less enthusiastically now, as if the weight of the words was finally starting to settle awkwardly between them. A moment passed before another voice entered the space, calm and precise, cutting gently but unmistakably through the tension. "Perhaps," the woman said, "some of us are far too eager to judge others without knowing a single thing about them." The group turned their heads, surprised by the interruption. It was Diana Winters, who until now had remained silent, her focus seemingly on the tablet resting on her lap. She looked up, her eyes meeting Walter's with a kind of quiet steel that did not require volume to command attention. Walter, caught slightly off guard, let out a dry laugh and waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, no offense, of course," he said with a grin that tried to appear charming. "We were simply engaging in a bit of harmless conversation. It is always interesting, observing people. Especially when they stand out." Diana's gaze didn't waver. She closed her tablet with deliberate calm and placed it neatly on the small table beside her. The click of the cover closing punctuated her silence. "Observing people is one thing," she replied smoothly. "Making assumptions about them based solely on appearances is quite another." Walter shifted in his seat, his smile tightening. His companions glanced away momentarily, their earlier amusement now giving way to mild discomfort. Of course," Walter said quickly, his voice lighter than before. "Just idle talk to pass the time. We're all entitled to a bit of speculation now and then, aren't we?" Diana offered a faint smile that carried no warmth. Her eyes briefly shifted toward Maye, meeting hers for a quiet moment. In that glance, there was understanding. Not pity, but recognition. A silent acknowledgement of the ugliness Maye had silently endured, and a quiet signal that she was not entirely alone. Maye returned the glance with the faintest nod, her lips curling into a soft, almost invisible smile. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of connection between the two women, unspoken but profound. Walter, sensing the shift but unwilling to retreat completely, raised his glass slightly as if to toast his own attempt at levity. "In any case," he continued, "we all come from different walks of life, don't we? That is what makes people watching so fascinating." "Indeed," Diana replied, her voice calm but edged with quiet authority. "And yet, sometimes, what you see on the surface tells you very little about what lies beneath." The words hung in the air for a moment, their weight sinking into the quiet space between them. The soft chime of the cabin announcement sounded overhead, momentarily breaking the tension as the captain updated the passengers on their progress. Maye exhaled slowly, returning to her book, though she was more aware now of the subtle shift in the energy around her. The direct attacks had paused, the aggressive smirks momentarily softened, but the air still pulsed with unspoken tension. The storm had not passed. It had simply pulled back, gathering strength, waiting for its moment. Diana reopened her tablet, her expression serene as if nothing had happened at all. Yet beneath the composed exterior, her eyes remained watchful. She had seen enough to know this encounter was far from over. The plane glided smoothly through the late afternoon sky, its polished wings slicing through streaks of amber and crimson. Inside the cabin, a fragile calm settled once more, like the quiet that precedes a gathering storm. The soft chime of the intercom interrupted the delicate hum of the engines as the captain's calm voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into New York. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and all electronic devices are secured. Thank you for flying with Sky Frontier." The cabin stirred as passengers adjusted their seats, gathered stray belongings, and prepared themselves for landing. Outside the windows, the first glimpses of the sprawling city peeked through breaks in the cloud cover, its glittering skyline glowing like scattered jewels beneath the fading light. Walter Kingsley sat upright, his posture sharpening as he glanced at his phone, which buzzed quietly in his jacket pocket. He retrieved it casually, glancing down at the screen. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered, then widened slightly, unable to hide the surge of excitement swelling behind them. "Well now," he murmured, a grin stretching slowly across his face. "That is interesting." His companions immediately leaned closer, their curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "What is it?" one asked, lowering his voice as though discussing something sacred. Walter held the phone just low enough to ensure only his friends could see the message displayed on the screen. A brief message from ground staff. "Mr. Kingsley, upon landing, Mr. Elon Musk would like to meet you personally in the VIP lounge." The two men exchanged wide-eyed glances, their earlier amusement instantly replaced by awe. "You are kidding," the second man whispered. "Musk himself? He wants to meet you?" Walter allowed himself a small chuckle, feigning modesty while clearly savoring every second. "No joke, gentlemen. It seems my name carries a bit more weight than even I expected." One of his companions shook his head, impressed. "You always know how to position yourself, Walter. You do not wait for doors to open. You knock them down." Walter adjusted his tie with deliberate precision, his confidence growing with every passing second. "That, my friends, is the key to staying ahead in this world," he said smoothly. "Connections. Visibility. You have to understand how these people operate. Men like Elon Musk are constantly surrounded by opportunists, amateurs, and sycophants. But when they spot someone who understands business at their level, someone who knows how to bring value to the table, they take notice." The others nodded, their admiration thinly veiling their envy. They watched as Walter continued, clearly relishing the moment. "While most people sit back and hope for opportunity, I make sure opportunity recognizes me. Timing, visibility, and the right conversations at the right time. That is how true influence works." He paused for dramatic effect, scanning the cabin with the gaze of a man who now saw the space differently, as though the walls had shifted and the hierarchy had realigned itself in his favor. "And who knows," he added, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "perhaps this little meeting will lead to something far bigger than just polite introductions. After all, Sky Frontier has been exploring expansion opportunities, strategic partnerships, capital injections. And let's be honest, they could benefit from my expertise." The others laughed softly, nodding in agreement. The image of Walter stepping into the inner circle of one of the most powerful businessmen alive was too intoxicating not to indulge. "I have always said," Walter continued, "success is not about luck. It is about making yourself visible to the right people at the right moment. Today just happens to be one of those moments." As the plane descended further, the skyline of Manhattan grew clearer, its towering glass spires reflecting the amber light of the setting sun. The excitement within Walter's group pulsed like an electric current, filling the air around them with unspoken ambition. Seated quietly across the aisle, May turned another page in her book, though her eyes had not focused on the words for some time. She had heard every word of Walter's monologue, each sentence layering atop the others like weights pressing down on a fragile scale. Yet she remained still, her face a portrait of serene detachment. The corner of her mouth lifted ever so slightly, a flicker of something that was neither amusement nor anger, but something far more patient. Diana Winters, too, watched from her seat with quiet interest. Her tablet sat untouched in her lap now, her full attention directed toward the unfolding display. She did not speak, but her sharp eyes absorbed every gesture, every boast, every subtle cue. She was assembling a picture, one piece at a time. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane glided lower, cutting through the final layers of cloud cover. The faint tremble of landing gear deploying signaled their approach. The excitement among Walter's group reached its peak, their whispered conversations swirling with speculation about what awaited them in the exclusive halls of the VIP lounge. Melissa passed through the aisle one final time, ensuring seat belts were secured. As she approached May, she paused for a brief moment, her voice a gentle murmur only May could hear. "Almost there, Mrs. Musk." May looked up, offering her familiar calm smile. "Almost," she replied softly. The engines roared gently as the wheels made contact with the runway, the smooth landing drawing a polite wave of applause from some passengers. The plane slowed, taxiing gracefully toward the terminal. In Walter's mind, the meeting ahead played out like a carefully scripted play. His confidence swelled, each imagined handshake and business proposal feeding the fantasy. He glanced once more toward May, the same quiet woman who had absorbed his words without reaction, still seated calmly as if entirely unaware of how the world was about to shift in his favor. Soon enough, he thought. Soon, she will understand the kind of company she's been flying with. The aircraft rolled to a smooth stop at the terminal, its engines humming softly as the seatbelt sign chimed and released the passengers from their polished leather seats. The first-class cabin stirred to life as flight attendants moved with efficient grace, opening overhead compartments and bidding farewells with professional warmth. Outside, the massive windows of JFK's exclusive VIP terminal gleamed under the late evening lights, casting reflections of arriving black sedans and private airport staff waiting to receive the most privileged few. Walter Kingsley stood with purpose, smoothing the front of his tailored suit jacket as if brushing away invisible dust. His companions flanked him, equally eager, equally restless. All three men exchanged glances filled with anticipation. This was not simply the end of a flight. For Walter, this was the beginning of something far larger. "Stay sharp, gentlemen," Walter said in a low voice, his tone thick with confidence. "First impressions matter." Musk didn't request this meeting by accident. One of his companions nodded quickly, adjusting his cufflinks while stealing glances toward the glass doors that led to the private arrival lounge. "You're about to secure a future most of us only dream of, Walter," the man whispered. Walter offered a small smirk in response, his eyes gleaming beneath the warm glow of the terminal lights. "Patience," he whispered back. "Timing is everything." The doors ahead parted silently as uniformed staff entered and exited with crisp efficiency, escorting other VIPs to waiting cars. The low murmur of distant conversations echoed softly through the luxurious hall, punctuated by the occasional sound of luggage wheels gliding across the polished marble floor. Maye Musk stepped off the plane at her own pace, unhurried and elegant. She held her small handbag neatly at her side, her posture as composed as it had been during the flight. Her calm was not rehearsed. It was the product of years of experience, of knowing exactly who she was without needing to announce it to anyone. Melissa remained close behind, her presence as steady and subtle as ever. They exchanged a quiet glance, no words spoken, no words needed. As May approached the large open space of the VIP arrival hall, the energy in the room subtly shifted. Conversations slowed, glances turned, and whispers began to bloom like small fires. Walter and his companions stood at full attention, their bodies leaning forward as the double doors at the far end of the lounge opened wide. From the opposite side, accompanied by two discreet members of his security team, walked Elon Musk. The murmurs swept through the room instantly, like an invisible ripple across still water. "That's him. That's Elon Musk. I didn't know he was flying commercial today. Is that his mother?" The words spread quickly, low and astonished. Eyes darted toward May as realization dawned among the gathered spectators. The simple grey turtleneck, the modest handbag, the quiet grace she carried, it all rearranged itself in the minds of onlookers like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Elon's face lit up the moment he spotted her. The carefully measured composure he wore in boardrooms and press conferences softened in an instant. His pace quickened, his arms opening as he reached her. "There you are, Mom." May smiled as she stepped into his embrace, her hand resting gently against his back as his arms wrapped around her with warmth that was unmistakably sincere. They stood there for a moment that seemed to freeze the entire lounge. The world, for those few seconds, narrowed to only the two of them. "You didn't have to come all the way out," May said softly. "Of course I did. Like I would ever let you take a taxi." Behind them, the stunned expressions of Walter and his companions told a silent story of shock, confusion, and sudden, unraveling humiliation. Walter's mouth hung open slightly, his mind racing to catch up with what his eyes were witnessing. That woman. The one I just... He couldn't even finish the thought as the truth slammed into him. Diana Winters, standing a few paces away, observed the entire scene with a knowing smile curving at the edge of her lips. Her eyes met May's briefly, and May responded with the smallest of nods, a quiet acknowledgement between women who both understood more than anyone else in the room. Melissa stood slightly to the side, her posture as professional as always, but her eyes gleamed with pride. This moment had played out many times in her imagination, though witnessing it in real time was something entirely different. Walter attempted to gather himself, clearing his throat as if he might somehow salvage the unraveling situation. "Mr. Musk," he called out, taking an eager step forward. "Walter Kingsley. We were scheduled to meet. Your office reached out." Elon glanced toward him with polite recognition but did not release his mother's arm. "Ah yes, Mr. Kingsley," he said evenly, his voice measured and calm. "I appreciate you making the trip. I understand you've been speaking with my team about potential partnership opportunities." Yes, Walter replied, his words stumbling slightly as his carefully rehearsed pitch dissolved into scattered fragments. "And may I just say, it's an honor to finally meet you. I had no idea, truly, that..." He trailed off, his hand gesturing awkwardly toward May, as if the mere act of addressing her might undo the damage of his earlier arrogance. Elon's expression did not shift. His smile remained polite, but his eyes were cool, sharp beneath the surface. "Yes, my mother often enjoys traveling quietly," he said. "She prefers to avoid unnecessary attention." May offered Walter the same gentle smile she had given him hours earlier on the plane, the one he had mistaken for submission. But now, wrapped in full context, that smile carried a quiet power. "It was lovely to sit near you, Mr. Kingsley," May said softly. "I do hope you enjoyed the flight." Walter opened his mouth, but no words came. His companions stood behind him, visibly shrinking into themselves, faces flushed and eyes darting to avoid contact. Elon glanced at his watch, breaking the moment. "Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay long tonight. We have other obligations, but my office will be in touch," he said coolly. "Of course," Walter stammered. "I understand completely. Thank you for your time." Elon gently guided May toward the waiting black car outside. As they walked together, May glanced back for one final moment, her voice low and calm. "Oh, Mr. Kingsley. One small thing." Walter looked up quickly, desperate for any remaining thread of connection. "Your watch," she said, nodding at the polished timepiece gleaming on his wrist. "It's running about 2 minutes fast." She offered a final, gracious smile before turning away, leaving Walter standing frozen, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. The echo of her simple words weighed heavier than any insult he had ever endured. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final whisper. In the distance, the city lights sparkled beneath the darkening sky, as the black sedan carrying May and her son disappeared into the night. The hum of conversation slowly returned to the terminal, but for Walter, the room remained silent. Walter remained standing in the center of the VIP lounge long after May and Elon had disappeared through the sleek glass doors. The buzz of conversations resumed around him, but they sounded distant, as if muffled by an invisible wall that closed him off from the rest of the world. His companions hovered nearby, their eyes downcast, shifting uncomfortably as the weight of what had just unfolded pressed heavily upon them. For a moment, Walter's mind struggled to process the reality that had so thoroughly dismantled his confidence. The quiet woman he had mocked for hours was not some elderly passenger living off her child's generosity. She was Maye Musk, the mother of the very man he had so desperately hoped to impress. The very man whose approval he had assumed he was poised to secure. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The aftertaste of arrogance lingered bitterly. Perhaps there was still time, he thought. Perhaps a gesture of humility could salvage something from the wreckage. He quickly straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, and signaled subtly to Melissa, who was speaking softly with another attendant nearby. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice quieter than usual. "Miss, may I have a moment?" Melissa turned toward him with her usual composed professionalism, though her eyes betrayed the faintest hint of knowing anticipation. "Of course, "Mr. Kingsley," she said. Walter took a small step closer, lowering his voice. "I realize I may have spoken rather carelessly earlier," he began, choosing his words like stepping stones across fragile ice. "If there is any chance you might relay my sincerest apologies to Mrs. Musk. I deeply regret any offense. It was entirely unintended." Melissa listened patiently, her face unreadable. She paused for a moment before responding, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make Walter feel its weight. "I will certainly pass along your message, Mr. Kingsley," she said, her tone courteous but distant. Walter nodded quickly, offering a faint, desperate smile. "And, about my meeting with Mr. Musk's team. I hope that opportunity remains open." Melissa's polite expression did not change as she glanced briefly at her tablet, confirming a new message that had just appeared. "Actually, Mr. Kingsley, I have just received an update from Mr. Musk's office." Walter's breath caught slightly, hope flaring in his chest for a fleeting second. "Unfortunately, the proposed partnership discussions have been formally declined. Mr. Musk personally reviewed the file and decided not to proceed." The words landed softly but struck like a hammer. Walter's face flushed, his mouth opening slightly as if to protest, but no words followed. I see," he finally managed to whisper. Melissa offered a gentle nod, her voice remaining perfectly composed. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Kingsley. If you need assistance locating your ground transportation, one of our attendants will be happy to assist." With that, she turned gracefully, leaving Walter standing alone, the final thread of his imagined future slipping from his grasp. His companions exchanged silent glances before quietly stepping away, distancing themselves as if physical space might spare them from sharing his humiliation. Walter remained frozen for a moment longer, staring at the polished marble floor beneath his feet, his reflection looking back at him in distorted fragments. The echoes of his own arrogance rang louder now than any words spoken in the cabin hours earlier. Melissa passed by once more, heading toward the terminal's side entrance. As she walked past him, her eyes met his briefly. This time, for the first time since their flight had begun, her professional mask softened into something faintly resembling a smile. It was not cruel, not mocking, but held a quiet, unspoken message. Some lessons are learned the hard way. Outside the terminal, the cool evening air wrapped around Maye and Elon as they stepped into the waiting black sedan. The city lights shimmered in the distance, casting long golden reflections along the glass skyscrapers. The driver closed the door gently behind them before pulling away from the curb with practiced smoothness. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward, but comfortable, filled with the kind of peace that only comes from shared understanding. Elon glanced at his mother, his expression softening. "You handled that beautifully, Mom," he said quietly. "Like a seasoned diplomat." May smiled, resting her hands gently on her lap as the lights of New York drifted past the windows. "I have learned that sometimes, saying less says more," she replied. Elon chuckled softly. "You could have put him in his place directly. You had every right." May shook her head, her voice as steady as it had been throughout the entire day. "People reveal themselves, Elon. You do not always need to help them do it. And besides, true worth never lives in titles or luxury or the seats we occupy. It lives in how we treat others, especially those we believe are beneath us." Elon smiled, nodding as the words settled between them. "I hope he remembers that lesson," he said. May looked out the window, watching the vibrant city pulse with life. Her reflection stared back at her, framed by the lights outside, serene and quietly dignified. "Whether he remembers or not is not my concern," she said softly. "But perhaps, someone else watching today will." The car continued its smooth journey into the night, leaving behind the glass walls of the VIP terminal and the man who had, only hours before, believed himself untouchable. The stars above twinkled silently, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. But within that black sedan, a deeper lesson traveled forward, carried not by wealth or reputation, but by grace, dignity, and quiet strength that required no validation.